The massive assembly hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with activity. Beings of all shapes and sizes filled the room. Some floated in anti-gravity fields, others stood on many legs, and a few were merely clouds of intelligent gas. The hall itself was a marvel of alien engineering, with walls that seemed to shift colors based on the mood of those nearby. Dr. Han Yun sat in the furthest corner, trying to make herself as small as possible. She was one of only 3 humans in the room. Her simple black suit and tied-back hair made her look plain compared to the exotic aliens around her, but her dark eyes burned with intelligence as she watched the proceedings. The council's head physicist stepped onto the central platform. The beam was made entirely of living crystal, its body catching and splitting light into rainbow patterns. When it moved, it made soft chiming sounds that the universal translators turned into words. "We have studied the human proposals," the crystal being announced. "Their theories about traveling between dimensions are not just wrong, they are dangerous. The math proves it cannot be done." Dr. Han's fingers tightened on her datapad, but she kept her face calm. She had expected this reaction. The aliens always thought they knew better. Holograms appeared above the platform, showing complex equations. The crystal being pointed out what it called fatal flaws in human scientific thinking. One by one, other council members added their agreement. Some even laughed at the primitive human understanding of physics. Back on Earth, deep under Mount Hala in South Korea, Dr. Han had a very different kind of meeting. Her underground lab was much smaller than the council hall, but it hummed with energy and purpose. Machines lined the walls, their screens showing data that would make the council members very nervous. "Look at this again," said Dr. Kim Soo, her research partner. He pointed to a screen showing what looked like a ripple in empty space. "It's happened 3 more times this week." Dr. Han leaned closer. The ripple shouldn't exist, at least according to the council's perfect equations. But there it was, breaking all their rules. Dr. Kim was younger than Han, fresh from university with ideas that more experienced scientists called crazy. But Han had seen something special in him, the same refusal to accept impossible that she had. "The council just finished telling everyone why this can't happen," Han said with a small smile. "They had very pretty equations to prove it. And yet," Kim gestured at the screen. "And yet," Han agreed. She touched the image of the ripple. "Nature doesn't care about their equations. It does what it does." Their lab was filled with equipment they had built themselves. Most of it looked rough and unfinished compared to alien technology, but it worked. That was what mattered. "The ripple is lasting longer each time," Kim said, pulling up more data. "The pattern is clear. Something is trying to punch through from somewhere else." Han nodded. They had been tracking these anomalies for months. Tiny tears in the fabric of space-time, appearing and disappearing like bubbles in a pond. The council said such things were impossible. The council said a lot of things. "What if we could control it?" Han said quietly. "Not just watch, but guide it. Shape it." Kim looked up sharply. "You mean?" "Yes. If these ripples are natural tears between dimensions, maybe we can learn to make our own. Real trans-dimensional travel." The council says a lot of things," Han interrupted. "But they're not looking at what we're looking at. They're not seeing what we're seeing." She brought up their own equations, messier than the council's, full of rough estimates and educated guesses. But they matched what they were actually observing, not what theory said should happen. "We need more data," Kim said, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "And better equipment. And we need to keep this quiet," Han finished. "At least for now. The council would shut us down if they knew." They worked through the night, recording every detail of the latest ripple. Unknown to the great Galactic Council, in a small lab under a mountain, 2 humans were taking the first steps toward proving them wrong. As dawn broke over Mount Hala, Dr. Han finally sat back from her screens. She was tired but satisfied. The council could say what they wanted. She knew the truth. They had found something real, something that could change everything. The impossible was only impossible until someone did it, and humans had a long history of doing exactly that. Would you like me to continue with Part 2, or would you like any changes to this section? Hashtag Part 2, Breaking the Rules. A month after the council meeting, Dr. Han sat in her office looking at files on her screen. She needed the right people, scientists who weren't afraid to think differently. Most importantly, she needed people who wouldn't run to the council at the first sign of strange results. The first name on her list was Dr. Park Ji. He had a reputation in the quantum engineering field. Not all of it good. Half the scientific community thought he was brilliant. The other half thought he was crazy. His papers on quantum field manipulation had been rejected by every major journal. Han smiled as she watched a video of Park arguing with a group of alien scientists. He was telling them their understanding of quantum mechanics was too limited. The aliens had not liked that. "We need him," she told Dr. Kim, who was looking over her shoulder. Kim nodded. "He's the only one who might be able to build what we need, if he'll join us." They found Park in his tiny lab at a small university. Unlike their underground facility, his lab was on the top floor with big windows. Tools and machine parts covered every surface. In the middle of it all, Park sat cross-legged on the floor, taking apart what looked like a quantum scanner. He looked up when they entered. "Dr. Han Yun," he said, not getting up. "I read your paper on dimensional barriers, the one the council said was impossible. What did you think of it?" Han asked. "I think they're scared," Park said simply. "Because you might be right." That was all it took. Park joined their team the next day, bringing his unusual equipment and even stranger ideas with him. The next person they needed was harder to find. Lee Hai didn't work at any university. She didn't publish papers. But her name kept appearing in the footnotes of breakthrough mathematical papers, thanked for essential insights. They tracked her down to a small apartment filled with boards covered in equations. Lee answered the door in pajamas, looked at them for a long moment, then said, "You've seen them too, haven't you? The patterns nobody else notices." Han showed her the data from their ripple observations. Lee's eyes lit up. She pointed to numbers that seemed random and explained how they formed a clear sequence. Where others saw chaos, she saw order. "When do we start?" she asked. The final member of their team found them. Song Mai was fresh out of university, but her understanding of dimensional mechanics was remarkable. She had sent Han a message pointing out a small error in their calculations, an error nobody else had noticed. "I can help," her message said simply. "I see what you're trying to do." Han invited her to the lab. Song turned out to be barely 25, with bright eyes and quick hands. When she saw their equipment, she immediately started suggesting improvements. With the team complete, the real work began. Park rebuilt their sensors, making them more sensitive. Lee worked out the mathematical framework for what they were seeing. Song found ways to predict where the ripples would appear. Their theory came together piece by piece. Quantum entanglement, the spooky connection between particles, could be used to create links between points in space. With enough energy and the right calculations, they could fold space itself, creating shortcuts between dimensions. "It's like origami," Song explained to visitors. "We're just folding space instead of paper." The Asian Science Consortium wanted to see their progress. Han knew they had to show something, but she also knew the alien observers would be watching. The day of the presentation, their lab was crowded with scientists and officials. The alien observers stood out, tall beings with gray skin and multiple eyes. They watched everything with obvious skepticism. Park demonstrated their small-scale tests, showing how they could create tiny folds in space. Lee explained the math, drawing gasps from the human scientists. Song showed their predictions for scaling up the effect. "This is dangerous foolishness," one of the alien observers said. "You're playing with forces you don't understand." "We understand more than you think," Han replied calmly. "We've run thousands of tests. The math is solid. Your math is flawed, another alien said, like all human science. But Han saw something else in the room. The human scientists were leaning forward, their eyes bright with interest. They didn't see impossibility. They saw potential. After everyone left, the team gathered in Han's office. They were quiet, thinking about the reactions they'd seen. They're going to try to shut us down, Park said finally. Let them try, Lee replied, still writing equations on a notepad. The math doesn't care what they think. We're close to something big, Song added. Really big. Han looked at her team. The maverick engineer, the pattern-seeing mathematician, the brilliant young physicist, and her faithful partner, Kim. They were an unlikely group, but together they saw possibilities where others saw only barriers. We keep going, she said. Whatever happens, we keep going. They all nodded. Outside their mountain lab, the world might doubt them. The council might dismiss them. But in here, they were breaking rules that needed to be broken, pushing boundaries that needed to be pushed. The impossible was getting less impossible every day. Would you like me to continue with part 3, or would you like any changes to this section? Part 3. The human factor. Luna Base Artemis hung like a silver jewel on the moon's surface. Deep inside the base, far from the tourist areas and regular research labs, Dr. Han's team had taken over an entire section. Warning signs kept away curious visitors, and security doors required special clearance. The team had moved here 2 months ago, after Earth's governments secretly offered them the space. The base's powerful reactors could give them the energy they needed, and the moon's lower gravity made some of their experiments easier. Dr. Park stood at the main control panel, his hands trembling slightly as he worked. The device in front of him was their first full-size prototype. It looked simple, just a ring of metal 10 feet across, lined with quantum manipulators, but looks could be deceiving. Power levels are stable, Lee called from her station. She watched numbers flow across her screen, seeing patterns that told her everything was working correctly. Ready when you are. Song may move between different monitors, checking and double-checking everything. Though she was the youngest, she had become their safety expert. All shields are at full strength. No unusual readings. Dr. Han watched them all, her heart beating faster. This was the biggest test they had tried so far. Dr. Kim stood beside her, ready to shut everything down if something went wrong. Starting quantum field generation, Park announced. His fingers danced over the controls. The ring began to hum softly. Inside the ring, the air seemed to ripple, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Their sensors showed what human eyes couldn't see. Space itself was beginning to fold. First fold is forming, Song reported. It's stable. No signs of collapse. They had seen this before in smaller tests. But this time, they were going further. Beginning second fold, Park said. His hands were steady now, focused on his work. Power consumption is within expected ranges. The air inside the ring started to look strange, as if they were looking through twisted glass. Lee's screen showed patterns that made her smile. It's working exactly like the math said it would, she said happily. Then something unexpected happened. A tiny point of darkness appeared in the center of the ring. It wasn't black. It was the absence of anything, a tear in reality itself. Are you seeing this? Song asked, her voice excited. The readings are off the charts. The tear grew to the size of a pin, then a marble. Through it, they caught glimpses of somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't their universe. Holding stable at current size, Park reported. We could probably make it bigger, but no, Han said quickly. This is enough for now. Let's see how long we can maintain it. They kept the tear open for exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds before carefully closing it. When it was done, everyone let out breaths they hadn't realized they were holding. We did it, Kim said softly. We actually did it. The news spread quickly through Earth's scientific community. The Galactic Council sent immediate warnings about the dangers of what they were doing. They said the human experiments could tear apart the fabric of space-time itself. But for the first time, Earth's nations stood together. They had seen the proof. Humans could do what aliens thought impossible. More importantly, they could do it safely. Representatives from different countries visited the lab. They saw the test results, watched demonstrations, and listened to explanations. One by one, they agreed to support the project. "We need a proper name for it," Song said one evening as they looked at their creation. "Something better than the device or the prototype." Han looked at the ring, thinking about what it represented. It wasn't just a machine. It was a way to cross barriers that everyone thought permanent, a way to connect things that seemed forever separate. "The bridge," she said finally. "We'll call it the bridge." The name stuck. Over the next weeks, they ran more tests. Each one showed them something new. The tiers they created sealed themselves perfectly when closed, leaving no damage to space-time. They could control the size and duration precisely. Everything worked just as their equations had predicted. But they all knew they were just getting started. These small tiers were just the beginning. The real test would be creating a tear large enough and stable enough to send something through. "We're changing everything," Lee said one day, looking up from her equations. "The whole universe just got smaller." Han nodded. She could feel the weight of what they were doing. Humans had always looked up at the stars and dreamed of reaching them. Now they were finding ways to bend space itself to their will. The bridge hummed quietly in its testing chamber, waiting for its next test. Around it, humans worked together, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. They weren't following alien science anymore. They were making their own path. And this was just the beginning. Would you like me to continue with Part 4, or would you like any changes to this section? #Part 4, Point of No Return. The emergency alert woke Dr. Han at 3 in the morning. Harmony Station, humanity's proudest achievement in deep space, had stopped all communications. The station, home to 5,000 people, was simply gone from all sensors. Han reached the Luna Base Command Center just as the first reports were coming in. The huge screens showed the last known position of Harmony Station. Now just empty space. "What do we know?" she asked the station commander. "Not much," he replied, his face tight with worry. Last transmission was routine. Then nothing. No distress signal, no warning, just silence. The fastest rescue ships would take 4 years to reach the station's location. By then, it would be too late. Han looked at the empty spot on the screen and made a decision. She called her team. Within an hour, they were all gathered in their lab, looking at the bridge. They had never tested it at the range they would need to reach Harmony Station. They had never sent anything bigger than a probe through the small tiers they could make. "Can we do it?" Han asked simply. Park studied the power readings. "We'll need more energy than we've ever used. A lot more." "I can get it," the station commander said. "We'll shut down everything except life support if we have to." Lee was already working on calculations. The distance is the real problem. We've never tried to fold space that far. Song pulled up their test data. "Based on our smaller tests, I calculate a 40% chance of success." She paused. "And a 30% chance of catastrophic failure." "What about the other 30%? Kim asked quietly. "Unknown," Song replied. "We'd be pushing way beyond anything we've tested." Han called an emergency meeting of the World Science Council. 12 hours later, she stood before them in a virtual meeting, explaining their plan. The council members listened with growing concern. "You want to attempt an untested jump across half the galaxy?" one member asked, "with an experimental device." "We can save them," Han said simply. "We must try." The debate lasted for hours. Some council members supported the plan. They had seen the bridge work in smaller tests. Others warned of the risks. A tear in space that large could be dangerous. In the end, it came down to a simple fact. They had no other choice. 5,000 lives hung in the balance. "Do it," The council president said finally. But be careful. Back in the lab, the team worked non-stop to prepare. Park modified the bridge, making it larger, stronger. Lee refined her calculations again and again. Song ran hundreds of simulations, looking for any way to improve their chances. 40% isn't great odds, Kim said to Han late one night. Better than zero, she replied. Which is what those people have if we don't try. They moved the bridge to the base's largest chamber. The power cables alone took up half the floor space. Every spare generator on the moon would be needed for this attempt. Park's hands were steady as he made the final adjustments. The quantum manipulators are at maximum sensitivity. If this works. When this works, Han corrected gently. Lee finished her final check of the math. The calculations are as good as they'll get. Song's numbers are right. 40% chance of success. Song had set up more sensors than they had ever used before. We'll know right away if something goes wrong, maybe fast enough to shut it down. The base had been evacuated except for essential personnel and Han's team. Nobody knew exactly what would happen when they tried to create a tear in space large enough to reach Harmony Station. Last chance to back out, Han said to her team. Park smiled slightly. We're not backing out. The math says it can work, Lee added. That's good enough for me. Someone has to be first, Song said. Might as well be us. Kim just nodded. He had been with Han since the beginning. He wasn't stopping now. The countdown started. The bridge powered up, humming louder than ever before. The air inside it began to ripple and twist. Power levels rising, Park reported. Approaching critical point. Quantum field is stable, Song added. Initial fold is forming. Pattern is holding, Lee said, watching her screens. Just like the simulations. The tear began to form, larger than any they had created before. Through it, they caught glimpses of distant stars in impossible patterns. This was the point of no return. They could still stop, still play it safe, but 5,000 lives waited on the other side of that tear. Han took a deep breath and gave the order. Take us all the way. Would you like me to continue with Part 5, or would you like any changes to this section? Part 5. Defying physics. The bridge's humming filled the entire chamber. Blue light pulsed through its quantum manipulators as energy levels climbed higher than they had ever dared before. Dr. Han stood at the main control panel, her fingers hovering over the coordinate input screen. All power systems are running at maximum, Park called out. His screen showed energy readings that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Core temperature is high but stable. Lee kept her eyes fixed on the dimensional stability gauges. Field strength is holding. No signs of collapse yet. Her voice was calm, but her hands gripped the edge of her console tightly. In the center of the bridge, space itself began to twist. The tear started as a pinpoint of absolute darkness, then grew larger. Through it, they could see strange stars and unfamiliar patterns of light. Tear is stabilizing, Song reported. Her sensors were recording everything, gathering data that would either prove their success or explain their failure. Size is approaching target parameters. Dr. Han input the coordinates for Harmony Station. They had checked these numbers 100 times. One small error could send them to the wrong part of space, or worse. This is the point of no return, Han announced. Last check. Are we go? Engineering is go, Park said firmly. Mathematics is go, Lee added. Sensors are go, Song confirmed. Then let's make history, Han said. She pressed the final command. The tear in space expanded suddenly, filling the entire ring of the bridge. The humming rose to a pitch that made their teeth vibrate. Warning lights flashed as their equipment was pushed to its absolute limits. Energy spike, Park shouted. Compensating. Field stability dropping. Lee's fingers flew over her controls, trying to balance it. Song's eyes widened as she read her sensors. Something's happening. The tear it's working. Through the bridge, they could suddenly see Harmony Station. The massive structure floated in space, seemingly close enough to touch. Emergency lights flashed on its hull. "They're there," Kim exclaimed. "They're alive." Han immediately started broadcasting on all frequencies. "Harmony Station, this is Luna Base Artemis. Do you copy?" For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice crackled through their speakers, filled with disbelief. "Luna Base, that's impossible. You're 4 years away." "Not anymore," Han replied, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "We found a shortcut." The bridge held steady, defying everything the Galactic Council had said was impossible. The tear in space remained stable, creating a perfect corridor across half the galaxy. "Power levels are evening out," Park reported, his voice full of wonder. It's actually working." Lee stared at her readings. The math was right. All of it. "We did it." The rescue teams went through quickly, crossing vast distances in single steps. They found Harmony Station damaged but repairable. A solar flare had knocked out their communications and main power. Without the bridge, help would have arrived years too late. As they worked, Han's team gathered incredible amounts of data. Every sensor, every instrument showed them something new about how space itself behaved when folded. "We're going to have to rewrite half the physics textbooks," Song said, looking at her readings with amazement. "The aliens would have to rewrite all of theirs." News of the success spread quickly through the galaxy. The impossible had been done, and done by humans. The species so many had dismissed as primitive. "Dr. Han," Park called out suddenly, "look at these energy patterns. The bridge isn't just creating a tunnel through space. It's making a permanent change." Lee finished, seeing the same thing in her numbers. "Every time we use it, we're making it easier to do it again. Like we're wearing a path through reality itself." Han watched through the bridge as the rescue teams helped the station's crew. Humans had just changed everything. Distance no longer meant what it used to. The barriers between stars were no longer absolute. Hours later, when everything was secure and the immediate crisis was over, the team finally allowed themselves to relax. They gathered in their control room, looking at the bridge that had just rewritten the laws of physics. "So," Kim said with a small smile, "what's our next impossible thing?" Han looked at her team. The engineer who had built what couldn't be built, the mathematician who had solved unsolvable equations, the young physicist who had seen what others missed. Together, they had done what the entire galaxy said could not be done. "First," she said, "we celebrate this impossible thing. Then," she smiled, "then we find out what else they say we can't do." Through the bridge, the stars seemed to shine brighter than before. Humanity had taken its first step into a larger universe, and nothing would ever be the same. Would you like me to continue with Part 6, or would you like any changes to this section? #Part 6. Ripple Effect. In the month after the Harmony Station rescue, Earth became the center of the galaxy's attention. Ships from every major civilization arrived, filling Earth's orbital spaces with vessels of all shapes and sizes. Each carried diplomats and scientists, all eager to see the impossible device that had changed everything. Dr. Han watched from her office window as another alien ship landed at Luna Base. This one looked like a giant silver leaf, barely visible against the moon's bright surface. Its passengers would be like all the others, full of questions she couldn't answer and offers she wouldn't accept. "That's the 5th ship today," Park said, joining her at the window. "They really don't give up, do they?" "Would you?" Han asked. "We just proved their most basic scientific laws wrong." The bridge had been moved to a special facility, heavily guarded and constantly monitored. The team still had full access, but now they shared the space with observers from Earth's governments and carefully selected alien scientists. Lee burst into the office, waving a tablet excitedly. "You need to see this. The latest bridge readings. They're showing something new." The team gathered around her screen. During their regular tests, the bridge had started picking up strange signals. Not from distant space, but from somewhere else. It's like echoes, Song explained, pulling up her own data. When we open a tear, we're not just seeing the space on the other side. We're seeing reflections of other spaces, other dimensions, Kim asked, leaning closer to the screen. Maybe. Song pointed to a particular pattern. Look at this. Every time we open the bridge, these signals get stronger. Like we're wearing away the barriers between dimensions. Han remembered what Lee had said after the rescue, about wearing paths through reality. Are we making permanent changes to space itself? I think we are, Lee said, and I think that's just the beginning. Meanwhile, in the grand halls of the Galactic Council, an emergency session was underway. The crystal being who had once dismissed human science now spoke with much less confidence. We must face facts, it chimed. The humans have achieved what we thought impossible. Our understanding of physics is incomplete. The council chamber erupted in argument. Some members demanded immediate action to stop further human experiments. Others wanted to learn from Earth's scientists. A few simply seemed lost, their entire worldview shaken. Back on Luna Base, Han's team was already looking beyond their first breakthrough. The bridge had shown them possibilities they had never imagined. Look at these readings, Park said one day, showing a complex energy pattern. Every time we open a tear, we see these same signatures, but they're not coming from our space. They're leaking through from somewhere else, Song added. Another layer of reality, pressing against ours. The team worked late into the night, studying the new data. They ordered food to the lab and barely noticed when they ate it. This was bigger than their original discovery. It's like we've been living in a flat picture, Lee said, trying to explain what she saw in the numbers. And now we're starting to see that there's depth to reality. Layers upon layers. Han understood what she meant. The bridge wasn't just a way to travel through space. It was a window into the true nature of the universe. And what they saw through that window was far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. Alien scientists who worked with them were beginning to understand too. Their own theories were changing, adapting to include what humans had discovered. Your species sees things differently, one alien researcher told Han. You don't accept limits. You don't stop at impossible. The Galactic Council was changing too. They had created a new division specifically to study alternative physics, their term for science that shouldn't work but did. Han's team ignored most of this. They were too busy with their new discovery. The signals from other dimensions grew stronger every day. Something was trying to communicate. Whatever's out there, Park said, it knows we can see it now. It's reaching back. The team gathered around the bridge late one night, watching the strange readings pulse across their screens. They had started something that couldn't be stopped. Reality itself was changing. Are we ready for what comes next? Kim asked quietly. Han looked at her team, tired but excited, scared but determined. They had already changed the galaxy once. Now they were about to do it again. Ready or not, she said, we're going to find out. Through the bridge's ring, space rippled with new possibilities. The impossible had become possible, and the possible was becoming just the beginning. Would you like me to continue with Part 7, or would you like any changes to this section? #Part 7, New Horizons. 1 year after the Harmony Station rescue, Luna Base had grown into the galaxy's premier center for dimensional research. The original bridge still stood in its testing chamber, but now it was surrounded by newer models and experimental devices. Dr. Han walked through the crowded halls of what they now called the Bridge Institute. Students from Earth and a dozen alien worlds worked side by side, learning to see the impossible as just another problem to solve. Professor Han, a young alien student, called out, their crystalline form glowing with excitement. We managed to stabilize a triple-fold tear, just like you theorized. Han smiled, remembering when the student's kind had dismissed human science entirely. Now they were some of their most eager learners. In the main research lab, Park was teaching a group about quantum manipulator design. His hands moved quickly as he showed them how to adjust the delicate equipment. "The secret isn't in making it perfect," he told them. "It's in making it adaptable. Reality isn't as rigid as we thought." Lee had her own class, filled with mathematicians from across the galaxy. They worked on problems that their homeworlds had called unsolvable, finding new solutions through human approaches. "Don't just follow the rules," she said, writing equations on a huge board. "Question them, test them, break them if you have to." Song, despite her youth, had become a leading expert in dimensional physics. Her lab was always full of strange equipment and eager researchers. "We've mapped 7 distinct dimensional layers so far," she explained to visitors. "Each one works differently, but they're all connected, like pages in a book." Regular bridge routes now connected human colonies across the galaxy. Ships could jump vast distances in moments, using paths that Han's team had discovered. But that was just the beginning. Kim led the practical applications department, finding new ways to use their discoveries. "The bridge doesn't just move things through space," he would say. "It changes our understanding of what's possible." Han found him in his lab, working with a small bridge prototype. "Any progress?" she asked. "Look at this," he said, activating the device. A small tear formed, but instead of showing distant space, it showed the same room from different angles. "We're learning to fold local space. Imagine the applications." The Galactic Council had changed too. They no longer dismissed new ideas, no matter how impossible they seemed. Human scientists were welcomed at their highest levels. But Han's team kept pushing further. The signals they had detected from other dimensions grew stronger and clearer. They were close to something big. "It's like learning a new language," Song said, studying the patterns. "These aren't just random signals. They're trying to tell us something." Late one night, Han gathered her team in the original bridge chamber. The device that had started everything hummed softly, still working perfectly. "Remember when this was impossible?" she asked them. "Everything's impossible until someone does it," Park replied with a smile. "The real question is, what's impossible now?" Lee added, looking at their latest calculations. Song pulled up a hologram showing their dimensional maps. "There's so much more to discover. We're just getting started." Han looked at her team, no longer just 4 people in a hidden lab, but leaders of a movement that had changed the galaxy. Every day, their students made new breakthroughs, found new possibilities. "I have something to show you," she said, leading them to a secure room. Inside was a new device, smaller than the bridge but somehow more complex. "What is it?" Kim asked, studying its strange design. "Our next impossible thing," Han replied. "The signals we've been detecting. I think they're instructions. Someone out there wants to show us something new." The team gathered around the device, their eyes bright with curiosity and determination. They had already changed what was possible once. They could do it again. "The universe is full of locked doors," Han told them, repeating what had become her famous phrase. "We just need to be clever enough to find the keys." Through the windows of Luna Base, Earth shone blue and beautiful. Humanity's home, now the center of a revolution in science and understanding. They had proved that impossible was just a word, that limitations were meant to be overcome. Whatever waited beyond the dimensional veil, they would face it together, human and alien, scientist and student, all working to unlock the universe's mysteries. The impossible had become possible, and that was just the beginning. End.